Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back from the coffee break. I now have the pleasure to open our traditional high-level panel looking at the most critical priorities and issues of international cooperation on migration today. I'm joined, if I will start, with Gerhard Karner, Minister of Interior of Austria, now for 3 years in the office and very much active in this country. I'm very much happy to welcome Nicole de Moor. She is the State Secretary for Migration in Belgium. She was the one when Europe decided about the Pact in the chair as during Belgium presidency of European Union. Welcome. And I have the great pleasure to welcome Nikolaos Panagiotopoulos, the Greek Minister for Migration. He is here for the first time in Austria with us in the Vienna Migration Conference. He's an experienced minister, having been in the government also responsible for defense in the past. And now he is our guest and also our chair of the steering group of ICMPD during this year. Welcome. So, ladies and gentlemen, this topic to talk about the different issues is a very interesting one. I think during this year we have been very much busy with all the elections for European Union in the houses of parliament. We had the elections in different big countries all over Europe. What we have seen is a trend that migration is one of the main topics being discussed. And people, we have been talking about this also in the past, very much worried about what is ongoing, not being satisfied so much. So I think it would be in the first round a very good exercise just to look what is happening in the different countries and how you assess that these results of elections are influencing our debate, especially when it comes to the next steps of the European Union. And with that, I would like to start with you. Gerhard, what do you think? Austria had elections some weeks ago. How do you think this can be assessed in this country?
Lieber Michael, vielen herzlichen Dank. At first, before I answer your questions, let me make a few remarks. At first, good morning to everybody. It's great that you're here in Vienna, in Palais Niederösterreich. I think it's a very wonderful place to have this conference. And so thank you to you and ICMPD for organizing this conference, and also thank you for you and your work from ICMPD. It's a hard work, sometimes hard work, but it's a perfect good work. Thank you for this. And the second remark, also very warm welcome to my new Greek colleague.
Thank you.
And also very warm welcome to Nicole. We met each other almost exactly 1 year ago here for a meeting. We discussed also about migration, that's clear. And we had also, for me especially, a bad evening. Why? Because 1 year ago, almost 1 year ago, the Belgian team beat the Austrian team in soccer. And we watched together in the stadium in Vienna. So that was not really nice from you, but it's okay. So thank you for this. And now to your question. I think a lot has changed, not because of the election in Austria or in our countries. It has changed because of high pressure all over Europe. Last week, the European leaders met in Brussels to discuss migration. And if you compare what was on their agenda compared to the discussion a few years ago, we can see a complete change in the discussion on European level. And I think, especially these countries here, was pacemaker in this situation. And an important first step in the right direction was already the so-called Pact on Migration and Asylum. But this is currently just a piece of paper. This shows that we need to continue the discussion on how we can improve the European migration system with concrete measures. Austria is one of the member states that was very much burdened by illegal migration for many years, but we managed, especially the last year, to reduce the numbers. In 22, we had 112,000 asylum applications. This year, until the end of September, 19,000 applications. And let me explain it, two more figures. In September 22, we had 13,000 illegal migrants on the border to Hungary. This year, on September, we had 840 illegal migrants on the same border. That means we made real progress because of measures we took, anti-smuggling, border control measures, but also international cooperation, or, for example, the obligation to work for asylum seekers. 2 years ago, per capita, we were the first all over Europe per capita. This year, I think we're on the 7th or 8th place per capita in the figures of asylum applications. But as you all know, migration routes change. There are several conflicts in our neighborhood, and the Pact on Migration and Asylum is not implemented yet. So we need to continue our work. In Austria, we think further measures are necessary in 3 areas. These are protection of our external EU borders, a functioning return system, and new and innovative solutions in the area of migration management. The first important topic, I said, are robust border controls. We have invested a lot in the protection of our external borders, but we need to get even better. Why? Because currently 8 member states have to do internal border controls. Recently, Germany and Norway started internal border controls. We share the same goal, a Schengen area without internal border controls. But hard work is necessary to reach that goal. External border protection will only be successful if we had good cooperation with our neighbors, and especially with so-called safe third countries. This is, in my view, a very important task for the new Commission also. The second element needed is a better and more effective EU return system. We keep saying that a functioning return policy is an important cornerstone for a credible migration system. Therefore, we have, together with 18 member states, sent a non-paper to the Commission, because we think that we need a new European legal basis, a new legal framework for returns. And the European Council has also highlighted this important issue a few days ago, and the President of the Commission announced to make a proposal in this direction. And I'm optimistic that we'll make a progress in this area. Another priority is the support of third countries to realize returns already on the migration routes. Together with the joint coordination platform, we have made progress on returns from our Western Balkan partners. And we also, and that's not an easy thing, we also have to discuss how we can start again returns to Syria or Afghanistan. In certain areas, it should be possible, it is necessary. And we would be even more effective with the help of Frontex. I therefore think that we also need to change the legal basis of Frontex to make this possible, and we also support new ideas like, for example, the return hubs. And that brings me to the third point, that we need new, innovative solutions. We still have too many people coming to Europe who are not in need of protection. Many die on the routes, at sea or in trucks of smugglers. We therefore need to continue our discussions how we can make the safe third country concept work in practice. I'm convinced that this is an important element that would help to break the business model of smugglers and will stop the death of people on their way to Europe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gerhard. I think this was most interesting to get an overview of what is ongoing in the discussion in Austria. Nikolaos, may I ask you, what have been the results of European elections in the discussion in Greece? Was there an influence of migration issues, and what is the state of play in your country?
Well, first of all, let me thank you for extending the invitation. I'm delighted to be here for the first time and contribute to this very important and crucial discussion, crucial not only for our national policies toward migration, but toward Europe, because I think that what's at stake now is, as Nicole pointed out very wisely last night, we need to devise a comprehensive European migration policy. And by migration policy that is comprehensive and European, I mean first, regulate legal migration as per our economy's needs, and second, control, because we cannot eradicate, control illegal or irregular migration. And please allow me to use the term illegal, first of all, because it's as opposed to legal. If we discuss legal migration, then it's only reasonable to discuss illegal as the flip side of the coin, but also because of the fact that this type of migration is controlled by some very illegal organizations, criminal organizations that are the traffickers. And I do believe that, allow me to say actually, that we don't discuss traffickers that much. It's traffickers who put people at risk at sea, not border controlling coast guards, for example. It's traffickers that make people conduct very unsafe journeys under very precarious circumstances. So that all generates a lot of fears and insecurities in our electorates. Those fears and insecurities tend to boost extremist parties on the political sphere. Those extremist and populist parties seem to feed on those fears and insecurities and grow by them. And it put pressures on our, this all puts pressures on our governments to respond and deal with the issue. One thing's for certain, extremist parties and populist parties will not provide solutions. They tend to provide very simplistic solutions on very complex and complicated problems that are getting even more complicated because wars tend to produce refugee flows. It's impossible to keep the head of a family from moving his family away from devastating war zones when land operations begin in Lebanon. It's only natural that people will flee those war zones. Climate change makes it impossible for people to survive certain areas in the planet, thus they will flee. The flow of information will make it easier for people to gain information on opportunities to set up a better life in different parts of the world. All these are parameters that will actually result in more and more migration flows. However, we need to regulate those flows. I do believe that the solution is agreeing more on legal migration, identifying our economy's needs, putting them all together on the basis of a European context, and then matching those needs with countries that they would be willing to have their workers follow the regular and legal migration routes to Europe. Illegal or irregular migration we need to take care of with better border protection, a more efficient policy on returns. Yes, we need to engage third countries. We need to speak with countries of origin, provide incentives to those countries, probably of a financial nature to a certain extent, but these countries do need our incentives in order to start complying with return policies and also implement the Pact. We've spent too many years discussing the Pact. I do believe that it's a very European problem, migration, and requires a very European solution. I've made that type of statement in Luxembourg 10 days ago. And we will only succeed in arriving to a comprehensive solution if we do it collectively, not unilaterally. The Pact is about a collective solution. There might some slight points of improvement, like dealing more effectively with returns, but in terms of solidarity, fair distribution of the burden, border control and border security, I think that it provides many steps in the right direction, and we should stick to the European Pact. It's the only way forward.
Thank you very much, Nikolaos, for this impressive information about what is ongoing. Would like to ask you, Nicole, you had federal elections this year. You have now had your local elections.
Yes.
Of course, migration was one of the topics being discussed.
Still.
So what is your assessment about Belgium? What is the state of play there?
Well, first of all, let me thank you for bringing us all together as a migration community. I think the absolute value of this event is that we are here in this room, this wonderful room, Gerhard, with many different stakeholders, with various perspectives, and that makes the discussion on migration extremely interesting and fruitful. And as for your question on elections, well, we had a real election year in Belgium. We had the local elections about 10 days ago, and in June we had federal, regional and European elections. And of course, as everywhere else in Europe, migration was one of the main topics during this election period. And I think the political landscape we have today reflects this. This is the political reality. The political landscape, both in Belgium and across Europe, reflects increasing public pressure on this topic and increasing public pressure for more migration controls and a stricter migration policy. And so indeed, in the federal government negotiations, which are ongoing today, migration is one of the main discussion points, and it gives us lengthy and sometimes difficult discussions in order to form a new government. So I think, well, we will see the outcomes of these negotiations in a couple of weeks, but it's certain that migration will be a big part of the new government agreement. That being said, and I know my colleagues who are really working on these lengthy and difficult discussions will not appreciate this, but the march of maneuver, the space to change something on the national level is really not that big. It are often very difficult discussions, but if we take a more broader look, what we are in fact doing on the national level is discussing on some relatively small details in the wider migration policy. Of course, we are discussing adjustments to the legislation or the conditions for family reunification, or how we are organizing our appeal procedures, or what are the conditions to have social benefits, and we are discussing all of these things. But the reality is, if we really want to make a shift in our migration system, then we are immediately working on the European level and the international level and the global cooperation worldwide with countries of origin, transit countries, and our European partners. So we are involved in difficult discussions now at the national level after the elections, but the big difference is what we will do all together on the European level. And that being said, Belgium remains a European partner as we were before the elections. The elections have not changed our vision on the way we have to act commonly in Europe. So we know we are at a critical juncture now with the European Pact on Migration and Asylum. It took us years to find an agreement, and we're all very proud that we managed. And as Gerhard already said, this has changed the atmosphere around the table. We have now a regained trust in our capability to come to a common approach and to find agreements on this. But of course we know it is still under pressure because the political pressure remains, and we saw in recent weeks also some member states arguing for opt-outs, and this is not where Belgium finds itself. We think this is not the way to go, the path to follow. We should remain in the common approach. We now have the Pact. It was difficult to find an agreement, but we still have to implement it. We have to make the Pact a reality on the ground. And implementing the Pact will be as difficult as finding an agreement. But for years, I have heard from media, from a lot of other stakeholders, you will never manage to find an agreement. Well, we did. And we will succeed in implementing it, but it will ask a lot of efforts, and Belgium is ready. We are fully working on our national implementation plan together with the Commission to implement the Pact, and this will, even after the elections, with all the political tension on migration, this will remain our priority for the months and years to come.
Thank you very much, Nicole. I think you have mentioned this international cooperation and the international level. And I think we should, in the second round, a little bit look to the different agreements that have been reached out by different countries, also by European Union. You know, around the Mediterranean Sea, we have seen a lot of movement. There are a lot of interest, but also with countries like India or Bangladesh, there are agreements in place. So could you give us a little bit your point of view concerning this migration diplomacy for the future? How much important is that for you? And what do you think will happen from the European level as well as from the national level? So, Nikolaos, may I start now the other way around with you?
On bilateral agreements, well, first of all, bilateral agreements will serve towards regulating in a better way legal migration. It will, I think they are vital because they are mutually beneficial both to the economy, to both the economies of both countries. In Greece, there's a general need of about 200,000 jobs in sectors like agriculture, the tourist industry, especially busy in the summer months, and the big infrastructure projects. We lack 200,000 skilled workers. How will we bridge that gap? Well, we will reach out to countries where we might be able to construct bilateral agreements so that we import those workers in a very legal manner via entry permits and then stay permits and finally work permits issued through our agencies. So far, we've signed 2 such agreements, one with Bangladesh, geared mostly toward the agricultural sector, and another one with Egypt that is geared also toward the agricultural sector. I don't know if it will come as a surprise to you to find out that about 90% of our workers in the fishing sector come from Egypt. And that was already the case before we signed that agreement, but now we want to put it on a broader basis, more organized basis, and more practical and efficient basis. It's in the process of working out right now. We need to improve a few points in making this agreement work in a swifter and faster and more efficient way, but we're getting there. At the same time, we're negotiating with a number of other countries like India and Vietnam and the Philippines to conclude such bilateral agreements. At the core of this discussion is the need of our economy for jobs that are lacking right now. And I do believe that in that respect, working out such agreements on the basis of a very legal way of migrating is also important for combating irregular or illegal migration. Our Prime Minister, Kyriakos Mitsotakis, stated in the recent Leader Summit and EU Leader Summit that it must not be up to the traffickers to determine who will be entering Europe and why. It has to be up to Europe. It has to be up to each country and all of us collectively. I would like to see a more comprehensive plan of all European member states addressing their economies' needs and pooling them all together and dividing them by productive sectors and then reaching out and concluding agreements. I do believe this is a very high level of ambition. However, we must strive toward achieving high levels of ambition. However, if you want to start with boosting legal migration at the expense of irregular or illegal migration, those bilateral agreements is a good place to start. Let's take this, let's say, authority out of traffickers' hands. Let's assume responsibility ourselves in a very legal manner. There are bureaucratic affairs to be settled, to be sure, because it's a matter of a different number of agencies, let's say within Greece. Ministry of Foreign Affairs have to expedite the requests for entry visas. Ministry of Interior Affairs have to expedite the stay permits, and Ministry of Agriculture or Employment in Greece have to deal with the allocation of those entries into our countries to the job market. However, we need to coordinate. Ministry of Immigration of Greece is the coordinating factor, and it's a very ambitious project that needs to succeed. We have no other option.
Thank you very much. May I pass the floor to you, Nicole? What are the plans of Belgium in this regard?
Well, migration diplomacy is extremely important in the migration debate, and I always say migration is as much a matter of foreign affairs than a matter of internal affairs. Now, when we talk about migration diplomacy, it's clear that it's not just about agreements or frameworks. It's about finding mutual interests between different countries. And ever since I took my job as a migration minister, I've traveled a lot. I've visited many countries of origin, transit countries. I've undertaken various missions. I've seen much ambassadors in Brussels. And I think to me, three key lessons stand out. First of all, diplomacy is about listening more than speaking. Certainly when you talk about migration diplomacy. When you negotiate migration agreements, you need to first understand the needs and concerns of your partners. And those are diverse. I know for many countries of origin, for example, the role of diaspora and remittances are extremely important. So if you do not recognize this, it's becoming very difficult to find mutually beneficial agreements. For other countries, it's important to show and facilitate opportunities for legal migration. So we do make these legal migration projects part of our partnerships. We have some very good examples, also projects Belgium and Georgia are, for example, doing with the help of ICMPD and the expertise and EU funding, and we are organizing mobility for small entrepreneurs in startup companies to exchange ideas and to have economic mobility being facilitated between those countries. Those are projects that should be part of those mutually beneficial partnerships if you listen and understand what the needs and concerns are of your partners. I think a second lesson, which is very important, is we cannot do migration diplomacy on our own. We need to work together. We need to speak out with one voice as the EU because we have a common interest. And we have managed with the Migration Pact to have a reform of our internal household within the EU, but also in everything we do externally in our relation with partners, with countries of origin and transit countries. We have to speak with one voice whenever possible. So this is extremely important, and that's why the role of the EU as a collective actor in migration policy is also vital, I think. And then a third lesson is that migration diplomacy requires a whole-of-government approach. Migration is not just a matter for migration ministers. We need our other colleagues that are competent for trade, economic investments, humanitarian aid, foreign affairs, to work together with us. And for a long time, this has been difficult in diplomacy. For a long time, migration was not fully part of our foreign affairs and diplomatic work. And now, slowly, we have seen a development. And I know I'm sharing this vision with all my migration colleagues, but we have to convince our colleagues, both in a national and on the European level, that migration is fully part of our foreign affairs diplomacy, and we need to cooperate, because this multidisciplinary approach is really what we need. And in my experience, this is also what works to come to mutually beneficial and respectful partnerships with our partners surrounding Europe and in countries of origin. I've traveled a lot on my own during my period as a migration minister, and sometimes I managed to convince my colleagues in the Belgian government to travel with me. A couple of months ago, we went, for example, to Morocco with Belgian companies. 20 Belgian companies accompanied me, and we cooperated and we talked about economic cooperation, judicial cooperation, and migration management. And it worked to come to a better understanding of each other's needs and concerns, and to mutually beneficial partnerships. So I think this is really the way to go, and as migration ministers we have to keep on bringing this message to our colleagues in other departments in order to strengthen the partnerships that we will need in the coming years to come to a better migration management.
Yeah.
Thank you. Whole of government approach. This is needed really. Gerhard, what is your assessment about migration diplomacy?
I think Austria has also invested a lot in new cooperation models with third countries in the last years, and I can underline what Nicole mentioned and said. For example, we signed a bilateral migration and mobility partnership agreement with India in 23. It was signed by our Foreign Minister of Foreign Affairs. And in 22, we had a lot of asylum applications from Indian citizens. This year, we have almost no applications from India. So it works. Another example is an effective migration partnership with Morocco. The returns work much better since we have this partnership. And in 23, Austria also signed a cooperation agreements with Iraq. And also, as you know, Michael, in 23, we opened together with Denmark a training center for border police in Tunisia with ICMPD. That are concrete examples how we can work together, countries, and also, for example, ICMPD with concrete measures in third countries. We started a dialogue in security and migration with Turkey, and let me also mention that we continue to have a very close partnership with the Western Balkans. For example, I visited this summer our policemen on the Serbian-North Macedonian border, where our Austrian policemen are doing work there. And that's concrete measures and concrete examples how we can work together and improve the situation on migration. Trust, I'm sure, is the basis of any fruitful cooperation, like Nicole before mentioned. And it is important to follow a whole of government approach. Minister and ministers from different areas have to be involved, like Nicole mentioned before.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we all would like to know from the ministers and the State Secretary what is ongoing with the Pact, because we had the summit of the European leaders, some of them asking for a more rapid implementation, so it should take place next year, not 2026. So what is ongoing with the Pact, and how do you assess this? Is it realistic just to have it coming to force next year? I think we now are asking for the national plans for implementation, so it takes some time. But what could be done with that, and what is your opinion about that? May I start with you, Nicole, please?
Well, thank you. And as I already mentioned, implementing the Pact will be a huge work. And well, at the start of the Belgian presidency of the Council, my task was clear. I had to turn the political deal into a legal reality. Now our task is to turn the legal reality into a reality on the ground, and that's a completely different phase, into implementing the new EU law into national law and national policies on the ground. So we are indeed working towards an implementation as soon as possible, but we know the task that lies ahead of us is not easy, but we are absolutely motivated. We know the ambition is high. We've put the ambition there ourselves, so we fully realize what the task is that lies ahead of us. And although we share a common goal as member states, no single member state is the same. So we also see this implementation, or in the implementation with help from the EU Commission. We have this common approach and a bilateral approach. We have common implementation plan and those national implementation plans, because every member state will have its own challenges. If I take a look at the Belgian situation, for example, there are challenges and opportunities. There are things or aspects of the Pact that are relatively easy in Belgium because our legal framework is already adapted or is already in conformity with the Pact, such as, for example, our border procedure and legislation around that. But what is more difficult is, for example, screening on the territory or the new legislation on responsibilities and solidarity. We need a whole new legislation. So some things are more difficult than others, and this is different for every single member state. So that's why we are working both on common and on bilateral trajects. I think there are three main challenges that we will all share as member states, and the first is the budgetary constraints. As always, the first challenge comes down to resources. It's all about the money, and we need to put our money where our mouth is. We will need a lot of investments, budget to adapt our systems on the ground, to make sure we have sufficient capacities. So I think budgetary constraints are a reality in every single member state, and we will have to deal with it. A second challenge is the IT and the digital tools, the critical role of technology in the migration management of today, the changes that we will need to do, for example, at the Eurodac system. They are crucial. They need to be ready in time, because no Eurodac means no Pact. We need all these technological developments in the Pact. So this will also be a huge challenge, and I know the agencies are fully working on it, and that the ambition is high. And then third, there is the need for cooperation and coordination. There are a lot of stakeholders involved, not only the member states, but also the European institutions, the agencies, and all of our other partners and actors involved. So we need a good coordination inside the EU with all relevant actors to make it work. So a strong communication between the Commission and the member states is crucial. And then, of course, when it comes to the external dimension of migration, and we already discussed, we will, if we want the Pact to work, we will also, aside from the Pact, need to enhance our efforts to build partnerships with third countries, which is crucial to manage migration flows towards the EU and the pressure on our borders. So this is also an important aspect that we need to be able to implement the Pact in a correct way.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Gerhard, what's the Austrian point of view?
Michael, you asked if it is realistic to find a compromise, or we found a compromise, but it's not the question if it is realistic, it is necessary to find new rules, to find a new framework with the Pact. And Nicole mentioned it before, 2 years ago nobody thought that we find a compromise on this Pact, and we reached it. So I'm optimistic, so it is necessary to find new ways in the way of to fight against illegal migration. Austria supports, like we discussed at the last council in Luxembourg, a fast implementation. I think it is a step in the right direction, and the Pact contains many measures that can help to reduce the burden on Europe and also on Austria. For example, a better European registration system, border procedures at the external borders, the entry-exit system we need, I think, and we also need a more effective Dublin procedures. Yeah, that also is part of the game, I think. I'm convinced that this will lead to faster asylum procedures, faster returns, and reduced secondary flaws. But the Pact will only be a success if it is implemented in all member states. That's also necessary, all over Europe. In Austria, we have, for example, set up a national implementation project to guarantee the smooth but fast implementation. And also it is necessary in the meantime, we need to fully implement the current asylum rules in all member states. And if it's necessary, and I think in Austria it's also necessary, it is, to have changed to rules in our own countries, for example, in family reunification, as example, what we have to change in Austria. And I've also already said that I think that further measures will be necessary in the European Union. A better legal framework for returns, as the Commission mentioned, I think a few days ago, or measures against instrumentalization, for example, in the Baltic countries. And more possibility in the area of cooperation with safe third countries. And the Pact does not only include asylum rules, it also includes measures against migrants smuggling or measures for better border protection. And it also improved the cooperation with third countries, the so-called external dimension of migration. But cooperation does not stop once an agreement is signed. It is an ongoing process that needs long-lasting commitment and resources. We need to implement the agreements that we have signed. We have to see if we need to refresh older agreements or if we need further agreements with countries. And I think we all agree that we can only manage migration together and therefore need to continue supporting third countries too, providing protection in their countries, fight migrant smuggling, and improve, and I say it again, border protection. And I've already mentioned this today. I'm convinced that we need to work on new and innovative partnerships with third countries. I say it again and again because it's so important to have less pressure on our external borders. We need the possibility to apply the safe third country concept on a border basis in the future. That's one of the most important things, I think.
Thank you, Gerhard. Nikolaos, what's the Greek point of view?
Well, I think it's important to remember our starting point. If the Pact took some 80 years to negotiate, and we are at the stage right before implementation, whether that be in 25 or 26, then I guess the negotiation started around 2016. And in 2016, about 1.2 million individuals entered Greece from our eastern sea borders. 1.2 million. We are discussing some 40,000 entries into our country this year. It might add up to 50,000 by the end of the year, and we're still sounding the alarms. Compared to 1.2 million, this is nothing. However, we've come a long way since 2016. We as a country needed to establish an elaborate system of receiving and registering those entries to the European Union, proceed their request for asylum as swiftly as possible. Back in the day, we were receiving criticism for being too slow. Now it's the other way around. Paradoxically, we're receiving criticism for being too fast in processing their asylum requests. However, the Pact is here to provide the mechanism that will provide European solutions to a European problem. I must feel very satisfied because of that. We're satisfied because of the fact that it sort of makes sure that solidarity is put into effect. It's a bit compulsory, and I think compulsory solidarity is a bit of a paradox. I think of demonstrating solidarity in a voluntary and not compulsory manner, but under the circumstances, I'll take it, because my country has shouldered too much of the burden for many years now, and it's still bearing much of the burden and the pressure that comes from irregular migration flows. We are satisfied for the new provisions on border security. I do expect this type of discussion to intensify under the new Polish presidency as of the beginning of next year, because border security is just as important as the humane approach into rescuing people that are in need, despite the fact that they are entering, violating the European borders in an irregular or illegal manner. We do have to maintain that very delicate balance. It's important. I do feel satisfied that there's considerations about crisis management situations, since this issue can be migrants, those unhappy, well, unfortunate people, can be instrumentalized in order to achieve different types of gains and objectives, and crisis management takes care of that. I do believe that what is still missing, and therefore project can be made, is a comprehensive returns policy for rejected asylum seekers, because if approved asylum seekers and refugees receive the same treatment as rejected asylum seekers, and everybody finds their way into Northern Europe, then actually our return policy has failed. So we need to implement a more fair, strict but fair at the same time, return policy, and that invariably involves engaging third countries, countries of origin, providing incentives to them in order for them to comply with the returns. But that's the internal and the external dimension of the problem, and I do believe that we need to work a lot on the external dimension. And finally, I must say that we need to feel satisfied, because it's, well, it's not, probably it's not a perfect system, but it's a system that would require certain slight modifications, but it's a system that we've managed to establish in a very European manner, collectively, and we must make sure that we put it into effect. We are intending to be very diligent pupils on that, because we feel the problem when we manage the problem. So by December of this year, we will be able to present our national implementation plan, and we urge every partner, every European partner, to be as diligent as we are, because we are in this together. We need to face this problem in a very collective and European manner, and thus keep the spirit not only of the Pact alive, but the spirit of the very European idea alive. It's much more crucial than we possibly think.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we have been touching in these 45 minutes national politics, results of elections. We have been touching international cooperation, and now the Pact as the European model for the future. Thank you. I think was very informative. Please give a big applause to the ministers and the state secretaries. Thank you very much. Thank you.